Well, good morning, guys, and welcome to the show. Today, we're gonna answer a question. So you have a DSP amp, why are you still using those passive crossovers? That and more, coming up next. A real popular question we get when you're watching some of our install videos or looking at pictures is when you see an amplifier like this one that has a DSP, that's what the D in this stands for, how come you're running a passive crossover? I thought the DSP was there to take care of that. Well, the answer is not so easy. And today we're going to explore all of the things that make DSP active crossovers versus regular passive crossovers and why you either may use both or may not use them at all, and when is the right time to use them. But before we do that, we kind of have to answer the first question is, what is a passive crossover and what is an active crossover? Because I know some of you out there going, oh, you already lost. So let's start from the beginning. Passive crossovers. Years ago when I started in this, one of the most popular things we do to upgrade your car was to add a coaxial. Most cars come with a single cone speaker because that single cone driver doesn't have the tweeter, and the tweeter generates the high frequency tick and makes everything, more dynamic, luscious, gives it that, I don't know, but you guys love them. On the back of the driver, there's usually something that looks like this. It's a little tiny, almost looks like a battery. This is a capacitor. This is the bass blocker for that tweeter, because obviously this big mid bass can handle a lot more power frequencies, it moves, and that tweeter, well, it doesn't do any of that. So we need something, some form of a traffic cop to limit the amount of frequencies that get to this tweeter. And a simple way to do that is with the capacitor, which is a high pass filter, but it is done passively. Amplifier power comes into the speaker, it goes through here, the capacitor blocks lower frequency from getting to this tweeter, and it is all done, and there is nothing to it. There's nothing you have to set up. You just have to connect power to this. It's passive. As time went on, components became all the rage, meaning you have a tweeter that was no longer mounted in the middle of the driver or suspended over the driver. It was a standalone thing. The car manufacturers started putting tweeters in the dash, in the sail panels, in the A-pillars, because tweeters are very directional. Higher up and closer to your face you can get them, the better you'll hear them. And the mid-bass drivers, lower frequencies, not so directional, would stay down in the bottom of the door. A lot of the times the mid-bass was not located in the same place as the tweeter. They both weren't in the door. Therefore, you couldn't just put a cap on here and run some wires up to the tweeter. It became a little bit more complicated than that. And that takes us to passive crossovers that were separate from the speaker. On this particular set, we have a high pass and we have a low pass. Because we are going to make a dedicated external passive crossover, we had a little bit more real estate. We didn't have to worry about tucking it up into the basket of the driver or behind the speaker or something like that. So we could build better passive crossovers. A capacitor is a 6 dB crossover. A cap and a coil is a 12 dB crossover. 2 caps and a coil, or 2 coils and a cap, would be 18, and then 2 caps, 2 coils would be 24. It could get really complicated. Let's take apart this passive crossover and see what's inside of it. Find out if it's a 6 or 12. And this, in fact, is a 12. Here's the cap, here's the coil. Unlike this guy, which is just a cap, 6 dB, 12 dB. That means that this can do a little bit better job blocking the lower frequencies from getting to that tweeter. And it gives you a little bit more control over how you can play it, as well as increased power handling. Another thing that, by going to a bigger device like this, as opposed to the cap on the back of the speaker, is it gave us some real estate for attenuation. Meaning, this particular speaker has 0, -3, or -6 of attenuation. We can turn it down if we need to. When we move those tweeters up into the dash, on the A-pillar, on the sail panel, or just in our face, they became a lot louder than way down here, way down there in the floor. They're up here now. And in some cases, that got to be kind of annoying. So adding in the tweeter attenuation, which is what these are for, is great, because now we can control it. It can also help if you have a tweeter really close here, but a tweeter really far away over over there. This one is just overwhelming it. I can turn this one down and leave that one louder. Passive crossovers got a little bit better with a little bit of control. These particular passive crossovers took it one step further, which is something that is trendy right now, which is where you get a crossover just for the mid-range that can go over by the mid-range, and a crossover just for the tweeter that can go over to the tweeter, as opposed to having that giant box that you have to find someplace to put. This is kind of cool. Back to the mid-bass, this gave us a lot more potential to make the mid-bass sound better as well. On this style driver, the mid-bass just naturally rolls off. There's really no control with it. It's just designed to blend with the tweeter, and by design you hope you get what you plan for. And with this gave us the ability to control the mid-bass a little bit better, because now we could take our cap and coil, or in this case a coil and a cap, make a 12 dB low pass filter so that when the sound was playing it would roll off before it played the same frequencies as the tweeter, creating a low pass and a high pass scenario. The other thing too is that a mid-range, well, it can't play down to subwoofer, so it would need a high pass filter to limit how low it would play. And that was typically done using an amplifier's high pass crossover. And so now what you have is a high pass crossover limiting how low that speaker can play, and a low pass crossover limiting how high that speaker could play. This is what's called a bandpass filter. The top will be passive, the bottom will be active. So this is all done after the amplifier power is going through them. Naturally, a passive crossover has a certain amount of power it can handle just by design, and then that's it. Once you've reached it, it just turns into heat, and these things can get really hot. Let's talk about the active side of it done in the amplifiers, high pass or low pass, that we're so accustomed to adjusting. When looking at an amplifier's active crossover, you say, hey, I want to run a set of tweeters and a set of mid-range. Well, that's gonna mean we're gonna need something like this if we have 2 channels to run them on. Well, let's say we bought a 4-channel amplifier. We don't want to use these. Okay, tweeter is typically crossed over somewhere in the range plus or minus of 3200. So when looking at your amplifier, it has to have a crossover value of 3200. And that's kind of where the problem happens, is that most amplifiers don't do that. They top off at like 220, 250. That's not going to be enough. That's way off. Some amplifiers have a 10-time multiplier switch. Like this guy right here has a crossover range of high and low. The high goes all the way up to that 3K that we need, so that will solve the problem of this guy. We won't need it. The mid-range, if I don't want to use this, there again, we have to create that band pass. I need a high and low pass adjustment, which some amplifiers don't have. They have high pass or low pass, and that's it. That could be the problem. This particular amplifier, was why I picked this, is different. We can do high pass or band pass. It'll create that for us. So over here, we have our high pass crossover that we can set to 80 Hertz, and on this side, we have our low pass crossover that we can set to match this crossover, let's say 3K. Using an amplifier that has those things built into it means I have 4 channels that are going to run the 2 tweeters and the 2 mid-bass. This is a 5-channel amp. That means channels 1 and 2, channels 3 and 4, and the 5th will go off to a sub. But what if I have a rear speaker? Because I want a rear speaker. It's like I gotta have this. Now what do I do? This is the amplifier I bought. I want to go active. I'm missing a channel of power. Ugh. Now I have to decide, do I want my rear speaker? Do I want it to be amplified? I do. Do I buy a second amplifier? I can't. This is big enough. And okay, so that means we have to do that active passive scenario where these 2 drivers are going to be on 1 and 2. We will set that high pass crossover on this to 80 Hertz, and I will run my low pass and my high pass passive crossovers to these, and then on channels 3 and 4 I will also make a high pass filter and power these. Kind of gotten the idea of what's going on here. The other thing to keep in mind is an active crossover is done before the output, whereas the passive crossovers were done after the output. The other thing to keep in mind too is that when you are adjusting a active system like this, you have to get those crossover points right. These are done. These are fixed crossover points. They're non-variable. They're exactly what these speakers need because these were designed by the manufacturer. So there's no right or wrong answer here. I want that to be made clear. There's no right or wrong answer. When going active using dials like this, you can screw it up and get it wrong because it's a dial. Anytime I have to do this, I use the SMD CC1 crossover calibrator because there's no way for me to know if this game pot is, you know, if it's like this, is this, there's no way to know. This will tell me. A better way to do it, which is the most popular way right now, is with a DSP. Go full active, full crazy. Forget all of this nonsense of turning dials. We want this guy. DSP, that's right. Whole bunch of goodness. And that brings us to the question at the beginning of all this. Hey, you went with the DSP amplifier, how come you still use these? And a lot of you guys now will be able to like figure it out. Before we do that, some of you guys are still going, what does this mean? This is just a box. And this box is controlled by this guy here, a laptop. Some are controlled by iPads, tablets, phones. Either way, all the work is done via here. Tells this box what we want it to do. With this software, we have the option to do a bunch of things. But since we're talking about passive and active crossovers, this gives us the most control over our active crossover. So for example, channels 1 and 2, like the amplifier before, 3.5, we can pick 12, 18, 24 dB. We can slide this around and pick any frequency we want. That mid-range bandpass right there, we put it at 3.1. We can move this to 3.1 and we can take this down to whatever frequency. In this case, we'll pick 80 Hertz. And we can choose 12 or 24 dB. Now we have EQs and we have time alignment. Well, a whole bunch of stuff that we don't need to get into for this. As far as the crossover goes, this gives us the ultimate control. And it's active. All gonna be done in the signal long before it gets to the power output of the amplifier. So naturally, with this, we wanna combine it with this guy here all into one enclosure. And that makes this guy here, which to me is the future. Cars are small, there's not a lot of free room. Having two big boxes, well, sometimes it's not practical. We have the DSP amp. And just like the bigger DSP, it uses the same software to control it. So we have unlimited possibilities for crossovers. We can pick anything we want. So we're super excited. We go out, we buy our cool DSP amplifier, and we're gonna put this in. I'm gonna do all kinds of cool stuff. And well, I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, right? I'm just buying stuff. Or yeah, whatever. And you hear all the cool words. I wanna go active, cause I don't know. That's what all the cool kids say. So I wanna do it. All right, D4.800, DSP, 4-channel, 800 watts power. Everybody makes something like this. A 4-channel amplifier is one of the most popular next to the 5-channel. 5-channel's this, which is a sub amp built into it. It's awesome. It's super cool. However, you kind of got to know what the plan is. We've talked about passives. We can do these guys off of any amplifier. Takes 2 channels to run these. Life is good. We talked about a coaxial. Same thing. I can easily connect this up to 2 channels. It'll play all day long. And hey, that's what I want to do. I want to put in my cool set of rear speakers that I got, and I want to put in my cool set of front speakers that I got. But I bought a 4-channel amplifier because in my mind, I was thinking front rear sub, right? Not front tweeter, front mid, rear speaker sub. Oh, it's a few more channels. It's 2 more channels that I didn't think about. So now I'm going to do my passive active. I'm gonna set this for 80 Hertz high pass. I'm gonna put these 2 guys in the car. Now, I know what you're saying. Oh man, what's the point of having a DSP at this point? The crossover in a DSP is like the smallest thing that it has. Yes, it can get very exciting when you start going like 3-way active and you're like, I have a tweeter, a mid-range, a mid-bass, I have rear, maybe have a rear mid-bass, rear tweeter, I have subs, and I have all these crossover points that I have to set up. Oh, it's so awesome. And it is. It's very cool. It gives you ultimate control. It is a DSP, which means it has a EQ. And because of that, let's go back to the DSP and I'll show you. We have this EQ right here. This is for channels 1 and 2. A tweeter is only going to play down to, let's say, 3000 Hertz, which I'm just going to pull this up just to demonstrate what it is I'm talking about. My mid-bass plays between those 2 frequencies. So my mid-bass plays from the 3000 Hertz down to 80 Hertz, and my tweeter plays from the 3000 Hertz messing up. What that means is even though I've gone passive, these EQ bands here in the center are only going to affect my mid bass, and these bands here are only going to affect my tweeter. Oh my gosh, you mean I can still EQ it even though I'm only using... Yes, you can globally adjust channels 1 and 2 that have those passive crossovers on them and still tune the car. So looking at all of this that we now have journeyed through, we figured out that even though we have a DSP amplifier, in some cases we might have to go passive on those component sets so that we can amplify the speakers we've chosen. How do I avoid it? That's always the thing. Know how many channels you're going to need to accomplish your goals. In this case, we could have jumped up to the D6-1200, and that would have given us 2 extra channels so that we could have powered these on their own, thus removing these and going full active with this scenario. And that's all we have for you today. We hope you guys enjoyed this video as always. If you did, make sure you let us know so we can do more or less of these depending on what you tell us. And as always, you guys have a great night as always. We'll see you later next time. Bye.